It's your weekly breakaway for fun conversations on pro cycling and so much more. Join us as we go beyond the Slipstream. I'm Matt Harper, and together with my brother Justin, we'll do deep-ish dives on bike races, movies, bands, and all manner of shiny pop cultural objects. Oh, and did I mention bike races? We're kind of obsessed. Allez!
In a recent article on cyclingnews.com, EF Education Easy Post team boss Jonathan Vaughters decried the UCI's points and relegation system as absurd, saying that it yields racing that is anticlimactic and boring and is cynical. In this segment, we'll discuss our reaction to the article and our thoughts on the system. Matt, so why don't you start? Obviously, you saw the article before I did, and I think, maybe, I don't know, maybe now we both know as much about relegation in cycling because we've done a lot of research this week, but obviously you have more of a history with cycling and you've probably seen some of this go down, and I really haven't because this will be the first time that I see or that I'm really aware of teams moving up or down in 2020.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people might be familiar with the idea of relegation from professional soccer, which is a big thing. And you've got teams that move up and down through the various divisional levels that they have. There's like a top level, the pros per se, you can call it the pros or whatever. And then there's, or it's akin to like pro baseball where you've got the major leagues and the minor leagues, that kind of thing, in a way. But in baseball, it's, individual players moving up or down, whereas in soccer and in pro cycling, as we'll discuss, the teams move up and down. So the purpose of it is to essentially maintain a competitive balance, determine which teams are allowed to race in the top tier based on performance. So if your team is not doing well, you get demoted. Your team is, if you're in a lower tier, but your team does very well, then you can get promoted up. It works in like a 3-year cycle. So basically, the UCI, the governing body of cycling, assigns points for race performances, for results in races. There's points, and there's all kinds of crazy points, which is something else we'll get into. But basically, the way the rankings are determined is they take a cumulative total of all the points that a team earns over the course of the 3-year period. And right now, we're in the 2025 will be the final year of the 3-year cycle. So after this year, determinations will be made who moves up, who moves down. Some weird parts about it. Only the top 10 riders from each team, it's only their results are counted for whatever reason. And to be honest, I'm not sure how the rankings for how they determine who the top 10 riders on the team are. But it's only the points that are earned by the top 10 riders. So if the 11th rider on your team happens to be racing in a World Tour race that has UCI points and earns those points, they just don't exist, which is bizarre. Another strange thing about it is
that seems like it would cause that to weight more for bigger teams for sure, because your smaller team could easily have a one-off guy win a race, and that sucks that those points wouldn't count.
Well, I mean, chances are anybody on a smaller team who's performing high enough to win points is going to be in their top 10 riders anyways. But
maybe it doesn't factor as much as you would think. I don't know. It still seems like, I don't know. I feel like the points should be points. Why would, I don't know.
Yeah, it just seems like if your whole team is involved in the success of the team, I don't get that at all.
Like in soccer, they're not gonna not count a goal from a guy that's deep on the bench. That I don't know.
Yeah, it's strange. And then the way the points are doled out, between events, is just very bizarre. I was looking on Lantern Rouge, and they pointed out that minor races are kind of overrepresented by the UCI allocations as opposed to the big events. They said, for example, if you win the Vuelta a Murcia, a race that nobody's ever heard of, you get 125 UCI points, which is 5 more than you get for a stage win at the Tour de France.
Well,
insane.
And the Tour Down Under, I saw, has more points to it because it's like an off time race and it's a new race, and the UCI, is really involved with it, and they want racers to be there. So they're giving you more points to show up in, Australia in January. So.
Yeah, and there's a part of me that's like, when you're considering like the good of pro cycling and the growth of the sport and et cetera, the UCI taking steps to bring eyeballs and fans to lesser races, that makes sense. The more vital all of the races across the board are, the better for the sport, in my opinion. It's like I hate the idea of like everything being the Tour de France and nobody, it's like, well, that's all we're going to care about because that's all the world cares about and whatever. It's like, no, I applaud the UCI for at least taking steps to try to grow the sport in the lesser known corners, because from those corners can come the people to the bigger races.
Well, and you could make an argument that it's going to make better races out of smaller races, because
exactly
now instead of the race just happening, now you might have better competition. There might be 2 or 3 good riders in there that really put on a show, and you get some fireworks in a smaller race that you wouldn't necessarily see. And for your like 4, 5, and 6 guys on a team, it gives them an opportunity to shine.
Yeah, it presents all sorts of other possibilities and scenarios. You also get the possibility of like a Mark Hershey run that he had at the end of this season, where the guy won like 5 races because he was off, chasing points. Not that his team needed to be chasing points when Tadej Pogačar like won 26 races in a freaking year.
Yeah, but I don't think that they were. I don't think that they were hurting for points.
Yeah, so it does make for interesting scenarios in certain situations. However, that assertion flies in the face of JV's argument, right? Which is it's making the racing boring. And the reason he says it, he's looking at it as a perspective of a team boss. So what he's saying is it makes the racing boring for their team, because instead of being able to having the liberty to focus on putting everything towards the goal of getting wins in big races, where the consequence of failing or falling short of that goal is relegation, it's like, well, he can't really then do that as a business decision. He's like, no, we got to chase these smaller races. And, he's kind of like, I don't want to do that. I want to be big stage fighting for the big wins and getting the and well, I guess I see his point. And then having watched Enter the Slipstream, which is what we're going to be discussing in our second segment today, you have the history that he went through a similar situation a couple years back, looking for a sponsor. And that is also another thing that plagues smaller teams, is like, you need money to run these teams, which means you got to go out there and find sponsors. And what do sponsors want? They want Tour de France. Tour de France.
That was going to be my point, is if he's chasing the points in the smaller races, that doesn't necessarily, wins in smaller races and in points in smaller races don't necessarily translate to, glamorous, sponsor stuff. You know what I mean? It's like your sponsors aren't necessarily going to think it, because you're right. Your sponsors want to be on the biggest stage. They want to be on, the one where all the eyes are. They want to be in the Giro. They want to be in the Tour. They want to be on, in the 5 monuments. That's where they want them, to be. So, you're right. He's right that if it forces his team to focus on smaller races, and that takes away from them, being able to shine in the bigger races, it's absolutely going to, hurt their chance at gaining sponsorship, because the big teams don't have to do that.
Yeah, it's like such a double-edged sword for him. I mean, it's like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. And a lot of it, I mean, it all comes down to money in the end, or in a big way, it comes down to money. I mean, I just, it must be so incredibly frustrating for a guy like him to look at a team like UAE Emirates that's just got an infinite supply of money, founded by the Saudi, whatever that fund is, that, you know, the Saudi sports washing fund, essentially. Or not the Saudi, but the UAE
I know what
sports washing fund. It's like you can't compete with that. You know, he can't afford to get the best riders. He can't afford. He's got to go out and find sponsors, which means like he somehow needs to get results in big races, but he can't afford it. I mean, it's so ridiculously unfair, which kind of sucks. Which makes me feel like they really should have a salary cap in pro cycling, but that could also diminish the sport. I mean, the layers of complexity in this thing are daunting.
That stunts necessarily the growth of the sport, in my opinion. You know, maybe at some point you can introduce a salary cap. Maybe it's not a salary cap. Maybe it's a spending cap. You know.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe it's a resources type cap. But you know that makes me. Did you see the thing that I sent you on Instagram? It was like a video of the inside of Jumbo Visma's, Visma Lease bikes. Their like shop, you know, where all their bikes are.
Their service course.
Yeah, their service course. I mean,
I've seen that before.
It's. I mean, you know, you look at it and it's kind of disgusting, and you know, good for them. But it's like, look at the difference in the amount of resource that from your bottom, it's 18 teams that are in there right now. So the difference between your 1 through 10 versus your 10 through 18 is completely different. Like it's insane.
It's like the University of Alabama's like whole like locker room thing, where it's like it's like the world's nicest locker room for a college football team. And I mean, like, you know, what does the rambling look like? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know. It's tough because there's good teams on that lower side. There's great riders on that lower side of that thing, and you know, and the relegation obviously makes it even harder for those teams to exist, because at that point now you're back to the rebuild. You're on the, you know, you got to get back over that hump. You know what I mean? Now, as a fan, you know, because, like, you know, obviously I feel for those guys. As a fan, though, it makes me excited to think that, you know, because right now you have two of these, you know, second tier teams are getting really big riders. One of them being the news this week was Tom Pidcock's going to is going to Q36.5. You know, that's huge for them. You know what I mean? That's going to mean, you know, more points and more relevance and, you know, all that. And then Tudor Pro Cycling obviously picked up Julian Alaphilippe and Mark Hershey, and that team is looking poised to, you know, do big things. So, you know, as a fan, it's like, man, maybe it does make racing better, because those teams that have been on the come up, you know, they're building and they obviously have momentum.
Yeah, I mean, the two situations are similar in some ways. Q36 is like, I think it's owned by a billionaire. I don't think they're going to have money problems per se, but also, like, Tom Pidcock's only won five races, and Tom Pidcock's his desires for his career may extend beyond the road cycling scene. I mean, clearly they do. He's a mountain biking world champion. Like, he's into the Olympics and sports like mountain biking and cyclocross and stuff like that. So, I mean, how many points he's going to be able to earn for that team is up in the air. I don't know what it's going to be like with him going there. I think it's a bizarre situation, but I do think it's interesting, like how he exited, because how he exited Ineos, because so he had the tweet like right before Il Lombardia, when they left him off the Il Lombardia squad. He tweeted out something. It completely pissed the team off, and it looked like everything was just going to go to hell right then and there. But then suddenly, like a couple weeks later, it was like looking like, oh no, it looks like everything might be cool. He might be staying. Like, they seem to have ironed everything out. And do you know what happened with that?
No. I mean, a
Basically,
little. I know a little bit of it, but I don't. It sounds like you know more.
Ineos is on the hook for his contract, and they don't want to be paying him to be riding for another team. So they basically made an agreement with him. We're going to make it look like you're going to stay here so that you can get more money from Q35 or Q36. And so they made it look like he could be staying around. Q36 is like, okay, we need to throw more money at this guy to get him. And that's almost certainly what happened. Now he's gone.
That's
Is interesting, but back on the whole relegation conversation, when you're talking about like I mentioned a salary cap. I mean, it seems absurd to even mention a salary cap when the lower end riders in the top tier of professional cycling, like in UCI World Tour, they're making 5 figures. Okay, there's many riders out there who are not even making $100,000 a year. That's insane. I mean, like when you consider the fact that like I don't know that there's a single player in the NFL making less than $1 million a year. I mean, is there? Like
I don't know what the
NFL pretty much.
in the NFL is.
I'm pretty sure they're over $1 million or whatever for the biggest scrub in the entire league. So
now I mean, obviously the NFL has a union. Hold on, minimum,
right? Which the UCI, which the pro cycling has as well. But
all right, minimum salary for a rookie in the NFL is in 2024 $795,000, and an increase in the second year to $870, and the third to $940.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
So NFL rookie minimum. All right, so minimum salary is first year $795,000, second year $870,000, third year $940,000.
Got it. Okay, so not $1 million, but close enough. A lot of money. You can live very comfortably. So my point on all that is,
look at the difference. I follow Magnus Court on Instagram, and he does a bit with showing his hotel rooms, and like, I mean, sometimes these guys are staying in like dumps. Like these teams don't have a lot of money. It's the disparity between the two is something that that seems like that's what should be addressed is the disparity between the team, what it takes to put for a smaller team to put on versus a big these giant outfits like Ineos and
but also all that. As far as the hotel thing goes, though, like some of these small towns, like where these races go in France and Italy and all over, like there is no 5-star hotel. So on that particular issue, sometimes even the UAE teams and the teams with the deepest pockets, they're still staying in dumpy hotels because that's all there is out in the middle of nowhere, France. But I get your point.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll be right back. We are back. Enter the Slipstream is a documentary film available on Peacock that chronicles the ups and downs of pro cycling team EF Education's experience in the 2020 Tour de France. Helmed by Jonathan Vaughters, whose comments about the relegation system in pro cycling were the starting point for our conversation in the first segment of today's show. The team endured much drama over those 3 weeks in the late summer of 2020. Anchored by the overarching presence of JV, as Vaughters is known, the film gives an unflinching, if stylized look behind the scenes of a second-tier team competing on the biggest stage in the world.
I enjoyed this movie very much. Probably because I love pro cycling so much, and so anytime I get a look inside, in the curtain, I'm gonna like that if it's done well. And I think this movie was done very well. I think it's interesting to look at it in comparison with Tour de France Unchained, the big Netflix show, because there is a lot of shared DNA there.
Yeah,
and that could just be it could be a function of just how the sport of cycling is, and so if you're making sort of behind the scenes shows about it, they're going to end up looking kind of the same. But I don't know. I think they did a good job of finding the storylines within the team's experience, and playing them up for dramatic effect. And yeah, I enjoyed it. How about you?
I thought that something that could be very antiseptic and very, like most sports movie, it really hit me in the feels because of how, JV had to strike this balance of worrying about the business of the team as well as the mental state of the team and how they were racing, and I do not envy what he's got to go through, the pressure that he's under to be able to keep this all together.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, for a bureaucracy job, which is what that is, like, oh my God, that is just unflinching. That dude just must be stressed all the time.
I can't imagine. And it's in terms of what we talked about earlier, the fact that you have to work your goals to be able to make sure that you've got funding, and it's like, and you can't let the worry of funding affect your riders. And then you also have to think about the fact that you're going to lose riders. Like, you're just like, it's just a if this rider gets good enough, he's probably going to leave because you're just not going to be able to afford to keep him. And that's sad.
Yeah, it's just the cruel ironies just pile up and pile up when you talk about these smaller teams. I mean, this is just an extension of what we were talking about in the last segment. And, at the end of the day, that guy's he's a manager. He's a manager. He's a manager of people, and he has just tons and tons of competing interests that he has to find a balance between. And unfortunately, because his team is a lower level, he does not have the arsenal of tools that might be available to somebody on a stronger, more well-funded team. But as far as the movie goes, that all makes for very compelling viewing.
Yeah, absolutely. I found it interesting too how they judge success. I think it plays into what he said in that article. It's just like, it's weird how the goals of a smaller team, it shines through in the film that the goals of a smaller team are very different than those of the larger team, and how they have to put their focus in. And then I thought it's like, what a great way. And you're right. Netflix does a good job of this too, of showing how, important these wins in these big races are to these teams. And they did it very well of striking the balance of showing the difficulty of it, but also the exhilaration of winning. And I love any time you get to see like the machine, how they make the sausage, so to speak.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, it was speaking of winning, like, so fortunate for the movie that they got that stage win. Like, I mean, that was that was really great. Yeah, and it's a cool team to look at because they have some like up and comers, they have some seasoned veterans, they got guys in the twilight of their career.
Your best friend Nielsen Palace is on that team, right?
Yeah, my buddy, me and Nielsen go way back. No, it was cool. I mean, he was kind of having a breakout year that season, and he, as shown in the movie, he was only added to the team 9 days before the thing, so he didn't really have an opportunity to properly, quote unquote, prepare for the race, and yet went out there and definitely made a race of it for himself, and I think got some good exposure and could feel happy with his success.
He's only continued to grow. I mean, he had a better, I think 23 was the one where he had the mountain jersey for a lot of the time.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, those, but it also shows that, they're going, at some point, there's a chance that they lose a guy like Palace to a bigger team. It was neat. I thought Rigo was awesome. I was shocked to see his body, like the way that like one side of his body was like half the size of the other one. Like, oh my God, that was like striking.
Yeah, Rigo. I absolutely love that guy. I love the way he's like this like superstar of Colombian cycling. And I mean, as I understand it, the guy's like way bigger than Egan Bernal, who won the Tour de France. You know, like people just adore Rigoberto Urán, and he's got an infectious smile, and he's a showboat. Especially in his younger days, but he's also a warrior, and you see that thing of his body. And I'll tell you what, I really, speaking of him, was before one of the stages or something like that, one of the interviewers asked him if he was afraid, and he did not like that. He clapped right back and was like,
he was all over them.
He's like, do you know what I've been through with my family and my country? I'm afraid. Are you really asking me that question? I was just like, yes, you go, boy.
Well,
that was awesome.
It was his dad that was like,
yeah, I think he was like murdered by the cartel or something like that.
Yeah, and that's crazy.
Yeah,
you really, it's like, hey, lady, you have no idea what fear is. Like, I grew up in essentially in a war zone. So
right, and he's like, this is a bike race. Like, this is just us having fun on bikes. Like, there's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah,
so funny.
It was
a huge bummer when he fell off the podium at the end. I like the way that the movie used those graphics, like when they would show the people like moving up the podiums and down the podiums, and then like all of a sudden he was like in third and he was gone. It's like, oh, bummer.
Well, and I think that you're right that there's a lot of shared DNA as far as how that looks versus how what the Tour de France and Chain does, on Netflix. I love rooting for underdogs. It was a fun movie to watch. It was really, like I said, it had a lot more heart to it than I thought I would get out of it. At the end of the day, and it makes me, of course, I always root for anything American in cycling, and it's an American team, and there's a lot of American riders on it, and it's just it was fun. It was a good movie. I highly recommend everybody to go watch it, especially considering that for most people it's absolutely free.
Yeah, speaking of the Americans, well, it's not for free. It's on Peacock, right?
Oh yeah.
But I liked seeing TJ in there and like watching him playing chess with his daughter. Like, that's just solid, man. I like him. I liked him on the Tour de France broadcast this year, and like he's a cool guy. I'm a fan.
It was fun to get a little background on him. His commentary on the tour was really like my first experience with him. So it was neat to kind of get a little bit of background on him, and it's it makes you sad when you watch like the older rider kind of transition, but he's part of that. He's a big part of that team still, and obviously he's working with NBC too, so he's obviously found his feet outside of racing. So but definitely a good dude.
I'll throw out a couple of just kind of random comments about this. The title of the movie, Enter the Slipstream, I thought fitting because the controlling equity stakeholder of that team is called Slipstream Sports Management. The name of the team actually used to be Slipstream. I love how Anthony McCrossan is like the go-to voice for these documentaries because he's got that great nasally voice and he's just perfect. There's just drama dripping out of his voice, like, with that word that comes out of his mouth. It's like, it's so funny. I mean, I'm almost positive, like in Unchained, like that's the same exact voice for the same exact purpose in that documentary. I just find that so funny. And
well, he's the international voice of Tour de France. So I mean, he is the only it's only Bob and Phil in the U.S.
And I don't know if you recall, but I once listened to an interview with that guy. And do you recall what I told you about how he got into commentating? So he was like a junior racer, and he was in some just like nothing little race over in England or whatever. But it was being broadcast on the radio, the race. Oh no, he raced the junior race, and then his dad was racing in like the senior race that was after the junior race. And for whatever reason, the announcer for the radio broadcast like fell ill or like couldn't do it at the last minute, and like his dad happened to be there when the conversation was happening about like, what are we going to do about this? And he was like, my son can do it. And they were like, he's like, yeah, hey, trust me, throw my son in there. And so literally like after he just finished a bike race, he jumps in and like commentates this race, and it's like, I think I know what my calling is. And now he's Anthony McCrossin. I love that
Dad's
story.
like, he's like, my boy will do it. Let's go. Just throw him in the chair.
Yeah, so that was great. I love McCrossin. How about the thing where Bob Youngles like swiped Sergio Higuita's wheel
and doesn't even really apologize for it at all. You know, it's just like, it's racing, man. Sorry.
Yeah, and TJ, do you remember when TJ like totally called it out? He's like sitting there on his phone, like reading out the tweet, like really, like. I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of in agreement with Youngles on that thing. It is freaking bike racing. I mean, he was clearly
was at fault. He clearly swung his wheel out into the guy. Obviously, he didn't know that the guy was there. He wouldn't have done it if he did. But
right, he was looking over the other shoulder, and Higuita had gone to the other side. So, like, what I'm saying is, like, that is a part of bike racing. Like, sometime a guy is going to move behind you, and you're not going to know where it happens.
He could have been a little more contrite about it. I mean, he didn't have to just, whatever, dude.
Yeah. So, and then lastly, I'll just say, like to me, the real protagonist of that whole thing is Jonathan Vaughters, and the pathos with that guy in that movie is pretty great. Like the man is not afraid to wear his heart on his sleeve, and he had tears streaming down his face multiple times throughout that thing, and yet at the same time, like he's a I don't take no shit kind of a guy. Which I like about him. So it's cool to see a guy that's willing to a guy like that who's also willing to get super vulnerable in like a public space like that. And my favorite JV moment of the entire thing is in the ending credits when you see him like drinking a glass of wine, like he's got a glass of wine, he has his mask on, and he just like poured the entire glass of wine like over his face. Did you see that?
I did.
It's like right at the end when they were showing like little outtakes. I thought that was pretty funny.
He's also been on a lot of the Max coverage or the Eurosport coverage.
GCN. Yeah, he was in the GCN studio for the Giro, I think.
He's very accessible, and I think that is smart for him. I think he is very shrewd in the fact that he knows how to keep that team relevant even when it is not necessarily relevant. If you catch what I'm saying is absolutely. He understands what he has to do to strike the balance of the business side and the the promotional side of it as well. And I also think he cares about the riders. He's got a lot of heart and makes a lot of a lot of good decisions for that team. I think he's a great guy. I really do. I would love to talk to him sometime.
Yeah, I'd give a strong recommendation for that movie, especially like, if you are interested in learning something about professional cycling and what it's like, on the ground for a team, and you don't want to watch an entire 10-part Netflix documentary. Boom. This will cover you in like an hour and 40 minutes. Yeah.
It'll definitely give you a good insight into, the inside part of cycling, the things that you don't really get to see, on when you just watch a race. So, all right. On that note, we'll be right back. Welcome back. The Wire, an early-aughts HBO police and crime procedural dramatic series, is widely regarded as one of the best television series of all time. The gritty, realistic portrait it paints and the equal weight given to the characters beyond just the police and detectives, especially the criminals that they're trying to catch, immediately resonated deeply with audiences from all walks of life. In its innovative approach to structure over its 5 seasons, with each season centering around a different institution in the city and its relationship to the drug trade, was a fresh and new approach to TV making that kept viewers locked in and always wondering where it would go next. Since Maryland is our home state and Baltimore is a city we've both spent a lot of time in, we feel a special bond with this show. Over the next 6 episodes, we're going to take a look at each of its 5 seasons, one by one, and we'll finish off with an episode devoted to a discussion of the series as a whole and its cultural importance, as well as choosing our favorite scenes, characters, and plot lines. Obviously, Matt, I'd like you, if you wouldn't mind, kind of just give a recap of the first season real quick for us.
All right, so basically season 1 sets up the cast of characters, and it concerns the battles between the police department in Baltimore and the Barksdale drug gang. And the police department is basically like using a wiretap to try to get information about these guys. That's how the show gets its name. If you are listening to this segment, we strongly recommend that you have watched season 1 of The Wire, which is available on Max, I believe, because we're going to talk all about it and you're going to get spoiled if you're listening to this. So, so what are your thoughts on season 1 of The Wire?
I absolutely love this show. It's captured my imagination for 20 years. I've watched it multiple times, and really, as I've gotten older, it really, it changes for me and the things that I think are amazing. The very first scene of that show is this conversation between Jimmy McNulty and a kid on the street about a kid named Snot Boogie that got killed. And, it goes all the way, through this thing. And at the end, he's like, Jimmy says to him, he goes, if Snot Boogie always stole the money, why'd you let him play? And the witness says, got to. It's America, man. And like that, it perfectly sums up like the feel of this show is it's not the star of the show is Baltimore, and everything else around it is what paints the picture, and it's so good. It on all levels it just hits, and it's completely different than anything else. I always, I tell people all the time, I think it's the best show that was ever, that's ever been, the best drama that's ever been on television.
Yeah, it's certainly in the conversation. I mean, it's definitely one of the great shows. I hear it referred to all the time on podcasts. To me, the glory of the show, and especially like with the first season, is in the cast of characters. I mean, the characters in the show are just so compelling. I mean, everyone is fully fleshed out. Who these people are, even the minor characters. They're so well acted, and the other thing that's so great about this show is, like, as we said in the intro, the equal weight that's given to the drug dealers and the cops. This is not just the cops chasing the bad guys. This is the bad guys chasing their dreams. This is the political people and what their angles are on it. And you really get a great sense of the complexity of these types of organizations.
Right, and it gets more complex as it goes on. It obviously the first season it's very localized with this one it's essentially a cops first robbers type of situation. The thing that it does, the balance that it strikes between the good and the bad is so neat, because you absolutely 100% root for some of the bad characters. You 100% are like rooting for them, but you're also equally rooting for the cops to catch them, because it's very interesting to watch the cat and mouse of it all, and how they Go ahead.
The characters are so earnest. It's like you really get their motivations. Their motivations make sense, and the way they go about it. I mean, there's hardly any characters outside of maybe like Levy, the slimy lawyer. There's hardly any character where you're like, ugh, I hate that guy. You know what I mean? Even though these are murderers, but like,
Yes, yeah. But you're like,
they're just so well written.
well, and they're very well acted. I think they chose very well. The acting is something you cannot discount in the show. It's amazing from obviously Jimmy McNulty and Bunk and how well they do together to Freeman is amazing. Bubbles, the and they give so much time to like these little interpersonal relationships between characters and let you build that. You can build them. You build their lives in your mind and understand how they're feeling. And there's so many just little great scenes. The scene where Carver goes to Kima Gregg's girlfriend, to tell her that because they realize like, oh my God, we've all forgotten to tell Kima's people. And like, oh God, that little scene between the two of them is just it's 30 seconds, but it's amazing. And there's 100 of those in each season of this show.
Yeah, and like when you get to sort of see how they live and stuff, you get to see like what is an apartment of a guy who's dealing drugs out of a housing complex. Like what does his apartment look like? What's the home of an assistant DA in Baltimore? What's that like? I mean, all those little details are fabulous. Thing that I really love and that I sort of discovered in doing my research for this conversation is that it is a show about, and I said this in the intro, it's a show about institutions. So in the first season, you've got two institutions, the drug gang and the police. And what's kind of genius about it is that the same struggles that Jimmy McNulty is having in being heard, being seen by his higher ups, moving the priorities of his department towards what he believes to be the priorities are exactly the same as Stringer Bell. You know what I mean? These are two guys who are
coin.
Yeah, they're dedicated to their thing, and they're getting pushback from their higher ups, and they feel like they really know what the vision is, and that they got to convince the guy above them to do the thing they want. And I mean, that's just it's just beautiful. It allows the viewer to have empathy for both of those guys, which just makes for great TV because you're really invested in how this thing is going to turn out.
Well, and the show does a good job of going in directions sometimes that you don't realize that they're going to go, and it does a good job of zigging when you expect it to zag, and I think that's because they draw such a great line between both sides and give you the ability to find both sides equally likable and recognizing and having empathy for both sides of the struggle, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And you see it, you see that play out not just with like those two particular characters, but almost every single character in the show is dealing with organizational, bureaucratic difficulties that they have to deal with. The Lieutenant Daniels that's in charge of the detective detail. He's got his own agenda. He's like a true police. He wants to bust bad guys and stuff. But that's not exactly what necessarily his higher ups are looking for, and he only has like a certain amount of leeway that he can push because he's got skeletons in his closet, and the show is so good at placing these little threads where you're like, I wonder why that person's doing that. There seems to be something there, and there are little threads you can pull on that are just like so juicy as the details emerge over episode to episode.
Well, and it's really neat too, because while you have these players on both sides having similar struggles, the consequences of their actions are completely different. on the drug side, like those decisions are life and death, literally life and death. And not that the cops aren't putting their lives on the line, but the decisions that the bureaucratic decisions that the cops are making are not going, don't end with a bullet. And, I think there's a really, that one of my favorite scenes in the whole season is the scene where Weebay is about to leave after they shoot Kima. They really they're going to send Weebay, who's one of my favorite characters, out of town, and he takes D'Angelo to his apartment, and D'Angelo is like, oh, they're going to kill me. Like D'Angelo's like, for surely Weebay's bringing me here to die. And they put the camera on D'Angelo, and his face is about to he's about to break out into tears, and then Weebay turns on the lights, and you realize that he's standing like in a room of fish tanks, and Weebay's just like, hey man, I'm about to go, I need you to take care of my fish. You know what I mean? And he totally thought he was about to die in this moment. Like that was the whole weight of that whole scene, is like, oh, D'Angelo is about to take a bullet in the back of his head, and that was nothing to do with it at all. The guy just wanted him to feed his fish.
Yeah, those little character details are so great, and I love how that's another great thing about the show. As things callbacks from season to season. As we get into more about the show, the way that the seasons intertwine with each other is just absolutely genius. Yes. But like that whole fish tank thread,
new elements in.
Without letting go of the old stuff. It's like there's storylines that flow through from almost episode 1 all the way to the end of the thing, even though all of this new stuff is added season on season. But
it makes sense. It doesn't feel out of place. It totally feels organic.
No, and all of that is due to the incredible writing from like the show's creator, David Simon, who was like a beat reporter, a crime reporter in Baltimore. So I mean, this stuff is like coming from the source. The Weebay fish tank thing, though. I love how it's not until season 4 that you get to meet Weebay's son, and come to find out that the son is into the fish just like his dad was, and it just makes it's so much more real. A little detail like that is just like so much more real, and the show is so good at doing that.
Yeah. It is a tremendous show. I am probably most excited to talk about next the second season. One of my absolute favorites. Not my favorite the first time I watched it, not by even a long shot, but like the second season then has over time become my favorite season out of all of them, which is very weird considering that I did not like it at all the first time I watched it.
Yeah, it very ballsy. Like I don't want to get into it, and spoil next week's topic. But like, suffice to say, the show makes like a hard left in the beginning of that season, and you're just like, "What?" And the way they so artfully bring it all back in is just glorious. So, I did think of one other kind of reprehensible character that you can definitely hate that's introduced in season 1, and that would be one Clay Davis. That guy is so great. So horrible.
I love Darnell Rollins makes a quick appearance in there as the bagman, the driver. You don't know who Darnell Rollins is?
No.
Oh my God! Yes, you do. If you look up Darnell Rollins, you'll know exactly who it is. He is a great character actor. By the way, from DC. God, I'm very disappointed that you don't know who Darnell Rollins is.
Okay, well, why don't you just pillory me on our podcast? Thank you.
If you've seen the Chappelle Show, he is a major player in the Chappelle Show. But great guy. Again, just everybody. The casting in that show might be the best that I've ever seen. I don't think there's any character in that show, and there's so many that get introduced, especially later on, that are so good. But Andre Royo as Bubbles, really does.
Incredible.
His character arc is just unbelievable. I mean, that's what I mean. There's so many different things in the show that you could find to love, and there's so, like, in each time you watch it, you can really appreciate a different a different aspect of it, because it's such a great story, and the way that it expands over the 5 seasons, but still keeps that same feel throughout it's just amazing.
Yeah, I can't wait to get into it more.
Yeah, for real. So, all right, on that note, we will be back. All right, welcome back. In the Broom Wagon this week, I wanted to bring up a guy that I follow. I just want to shout him out on Instagram, who is a really neat cycling follow. If you're into cycling and you want a fun guy to follow, there's a guy named Aiden Burgess, who on Instagram goes by Burgess _and_his_bike. So Burgess and his bike. And he does comedy content and cycling. He does a lot through basically he does these character side by sides where he's playing a famous, he's playing like a team manager and a famous cyclist. And you may have seen some of them, that they're very funny, but he does both sides of it and does like his little impressions and has little props. But he's super funny, and he pops up in my feed all the time. And I just it's one of those things with cycling where, I keep finding these like super nice, wholesome things that seem to be, that revolve around cycling. And he rides, and he's a rider, and he puts on a lot of personal stuff too, but most of it is his comedy. And he really leans into it, and it's funny. I mean, he gets dressed up and he does this. His impression of G is so funny. He puts in like a pipe, like a goofy Sherlock Holmes pipe, and he's got I can't remember. He's got like a Trilby hat or whatever on, and he's like gray and glasses, and he's just like this old man, and it's just so funny, man. And it's just, he does all this stuff with he's got like certain character arcs with Remco and Jonas and Tade, and it's just very funny. So Burgess and his bike, great follow. If you're into cycling, you will definitely be into his content.
That sounds great. I will definitely have to give that a look, and we will link to it in our show notes.
Awesome. All right, Matt, what do you got?
All right. Well, last week in college football, there were not one, not two, but 3 different incidents of major fights breaking out after winning teams. In these cases, Michigan over Ohio State, Florida over Florida State, and NC State over North Carolina planted or attempted to plant their flag on the 50-yard line of the opposing and losing team's field. These were ugly, unnecessary incidents that have become all too normal in college football. However, they pale in comparison to the tragic death of college football player Medrick Burnett Jr. 1 month after sustaining a head injury in a game against a rival team. His grim final days were horrific, with family members struggling to make life-saving decisions as his condition worsened, ultimately coming to naught as Burnett succumbed to his injuries. This story received far less attention than the aforementioned flag-planting brawls, with no mention whatsoever of any of the big rivalry weekend broadcasts, and will doubtless be swept into the dustbin of history, only to be remembered by a few friends and family members. Burnett Jr. played for Grambling and HBCU, and one can only assume that the lack of attention the story garnered has much to do with racism toward HBCUs and the elitism that sees these schools as a less than. The fact is, nobody wants to talk about the reality of the danger of playing football, what with it being America's pastime and all, and of course the fact that football is a money printing machine for many organizations within its sphere. In addition to Burnett Jr., 3 other teenagers died as a direct result of injuries sustained while playing football this season, and a handful of others died from conditions related to or exacerbated by their participation in the sport. The fact is, football is an incredibly unsafe sport, and every weekend American families send their sons out onto fields from which they may never return. Would we tolerate this if it were a handful of speech and debate participants dying each year while debating? Or if girls, high school, and college soccer players were dying on the field in 3s and 5s and 7s every year? Or if 3 or 4 kids died while performing in school plays each year? I think not. And yet we tolerate it for football. And what of the brain injuries that don't lead to death? In September, Miami Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa exited a game after suffering yet another scary head injury. And just last weekend, Jacksonville's QB Trevor Lawrence was the victim of a dirty hit while sliding by the very violent Houston Texans Azeez Al-Shaair, which left Lawrence concussed and out of the game, and of course led to a massive brawl. American football is a violent, dangerous sport that should be outlawed at the high school level and below. The fact of its existence at this level is proof of our society's tacit approval of the death of children in the name of athletics and, sadly, entertainment. Certainly, there are myriad ways that kids can die in the course of living their lives as high school students, but participation in football makes this outcome far more likely. And even if kids don't die, or get paralyzed, or get gravely injured in other ways, including brain injuries whose symptoms may not manifest themselves until later in life, the violent nature of the sport leads to incidents like the flag planting brawls I alluded to in the opening of my Broom Wagon. Barring the outlawing of the sport, the time is now, right now, to make major reforms to the game to make it safer, including lifetime suspensions for dirty hits, and the much mocked but realistic and reasonable idea of doing away with helmets and other kinds of protective equipment to force these athletes to slow down. And lest I be labeled a hypocrite for my stance here, I also believe that the time has come for pro cycling to make drastic reforms to make the sport safer, especially in the wake of the tragic deaths of Gino Mader and Muriel Ferrer. Greater pressure must be applied to race organizers to ensure course safety, and heavy fines must be leveled for negligence. Every race participant's bike should be equipped with a GPS transponder so that riders who have crashed off course can be located immediately. At least we can see some progress in terms of rider penalties for unsafe behavior in the newly adopted yellow and red card system. The stakes get bigger and bigger, but in the end, sports should be competitive, exciting, and fun, but not deadly.
I couldn't agree more. Probably not the time to have I could say a lot. I mean, I put it to you this way: as far as football is concerned, I have a lot to say on that particular topic. I also very much agree with you. I think that the reason that story doesn't get any kind of real airplay is because the NFL and college football and the NCAA don't want it to. And I think they are giant organizations that have, giant money involved in a lot of situations, and you're very right that the sphere of the influence of that sport is large, it's hypocritical, it's dangerous. They make dangerous decisions on many things all the time, and the way that it's portrayed and the way that they explain it to people, they have done a masterful job in the last 25 years of essentially making it okay to do what they're doing. And like I said, it's a bigger topic for me. I'd love to actually have a discussion about this at some point, but I couldn't agree with you more. And it is extremely sad that it doesn't get more. It's sad that more people don't talk about it. It really is. It's a dangerous sport. You're very right. That's all for this week. Join us next week for a conversation about whether the dominance of Tadej Pogačar this season and in general is good for cycling. We'll also talk about The Last Rider, the Hulu documentary about Greg LeMond, and we'll dive into the second installment of our look at the classic HBO crime procedural, The Wire. Until then, for my brother Matt, I'm Justin Harper, saying thanks for joining us on another ride beyond the Slipstream. Allez!
Beyond the Slipstream is a production of Harperama. Find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please like and subscribe, smash that button, leave a 5-star review, and most importantly, tell all your friends about us. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time. Ale!